Well, maybe a little bit of the history. Why now? First of all, we started on this well over 6 years ago, actually, before I became governor. We have interdicted more drugs into highway than in history. The highway patrols basically changed their whole purpose of looking to what they can do to do interdiction. Why does Ohio get hit? Well, we have good things going for us in terms of location, but we also are a major artery. When you think about Ohio, we're only a day's drive from Mexico. The drug cartels come through our state. We have great transportation system, and we're only a few hours from Chicago. So it becomes an artery, and as the highway patrols become more aggressive, we believe we're beginning to see that artery change. We've driven up the cost of being a drug dealer here in the state of Ohio, and so we're seeing progress on that. Secondly, it should be noted that as a result of the work that we did with the medical community, we've seen a 20% drop in the number of prescriptions. That's real success, and you heard the reports on doctor shopping and the reports on the ability to go to emergency rooms and all that. That stuff is now pretty well behind us. Now, why didn't we move sooner? We didn't move sooner because we wanted, first of all, to have these voluntary guidelines. You have two choices. You can either shove stuff down people's throats, or you can work cooperatively. And because we work cooperatively with all the prescriber community, we've seen this 20% drop. Now, Dr. Applegate has been studying since we went through those guidelines and looking at the practices of people. See, if you slam everything down, you have an access problem. Then people can't see a doctor. Doctors just say, I'm not participating. If you got a problem, don't come to me. And so by working this thing over time, we've gotten in a position of where we can take a look at the prescribing practices, which are reasonable. And we find that there are outliers. So we were then in a position now to move as quickly as we can and as firmly as we can to crank down even more. So now you hear about the 7-day and the 5-day limits, which is going to work. And why is it going to work? Because the community's buying in. And secondly, Dr. Applegate wasn't as clear on this. I want you to understand, there are going to be places where it will not be acceptable to prescribe anything. Okay, that's just a fact. She's now cranking that down. Why does this matter? Well, the legislature, I give them a lot of credit, they gave us the power to have these boards draw these regulations and rules. So we don't have to go through any kind of legislative process on this. It's done. These boards have all agreed to implement this. Now, if a doctor is an outlier, you know what happens to a doctor? They can lose their license. There's no ease in all this. You are going to have to abide by these rules, and if you don't, you're going to be in serious trouble. Whether you're a doctor, a dentist, a nurse, it doesn't matter across the board. And why will that be effective? It'll be effective because all the boards have bought in. So we're all working in the same direction. We're all doing the same things that we need to do. So I'm very pleased about this. We have a number of other initiatives that you'll be hearing about. And what we have found on this is that we have to constantly evolve. There's always something we find out that we need to do that can help us to get on top of this. And we have made progress, make no mistake, but the progress isn't enough. Let me just suggest one other element of all this. We're spending about $1 billion fighting this. We're interdicting people on our highways. ORS is up, and the doctors and all the prescribers are now reporting to ORS. We've seen the drop in prescribing. We're now going to the 7- and 5-day limit, all these kinds of things. But there's another element of this, and that is the public itself. On Friday, I'll be meeting with a number of religious leaders to talk about what happens in their churches. I don't know if we're going to have rabbis. I certainly hope so, and if they're not invited, they ought to be invited. I don't care who they are. If they're there on Saturdays or Sundays, and they're out there in a position to be able to influence their various congregations, we want them to do that. We have, as you know, Start Talking. We've got the schools involved, the patrols involved in that. Look, part of the reason why this happens, and I know many, many cases of this, part of it is that sometimes young people go to school and they experiment, and the next thing you know, they're addicted. But there is, and that's a problem. You know, it's like we have to tell our children or our young people to stay away from the drugs. It's not unusual for me to talk to college students where I warn them about this problem of going to a party on a Friday night and one of their buddies says, hey, there's a bowl of pills, let's take one. I mean, this is a problem. This is not somebody that's doing anything other than going to college and trying to get an education, and they just sort of stumble their way into this addiction. But there's another group. The other group are people who feel as they don't matter, that they can't find work, or they are underemployed, and they become, in a way, hopeless. Now, those are our responsibilities too. In other words, the ability for all of us to reach out and love somebody who's down on their luck cannot be underestimated. I mean, what it gets down to is, as I tell my children, I don't even tell my kids about this anymore. The reason why I don't tell them is I've told them so many times, and my wife has told them so many times, you tell your kids over and over and over again, you've got to be careful you don't overdo it. Where they say, oh, well, what is this all about, you know? But they got it. I hope they're strong enough that when the temptation comes to hang out with their peers or their friends or their cousins or whoever, that they say no. But I think we also have this obligation to these people who are down on their luck, right, Doctor? Dr. Hurst is a psychiatrist, down on their luck, and they're looking for escape. That's the community. You see, it's not unusual for me to go to a restaurant and see a bunch of people sitting at a table and kids. I walk over and say, please don't do drugs. I mean, I get out of my comfort zone to stick my nose into somebody else's business. We need to increasingly stick our noses into somebody else's business. Because as we become more dysfunctional at the community level, bad things happen. So it's a partnership. You know, we're spending the money, we're busting the people, the limits are in, the doctor shopping, shutting down the pill mills, all these things are in place. But no one should think that this gets completely solved just by the people at the State House trying to do something. It has to be solved in our civic organizations, in our schools, in our churches, in our synagogues, at the Little League game, at the basketball playoff games. The word has to be out. And if you're hurting and you need a little love, we got plenty of love to give if we think about it. Give it to somebody else. Give them a little hope, a little pat on the back. Can make a big difference in terms of the ultimate results here. There's 7 or 8 of us that have putting these guidelines into place. These, by the way, are in many respects more stringent than the CDC guidelines, which are kind of broad. But we think it's appropriate because of the steps that we have taken. And we're winning this battle, but we have a long way to go in winning the war. As a young man, I could remember this fight going all the way back to Nancy Reagan saying, just say no. For those that are young here, young reporters, she was the wife of Ronald Reagan as a president. But this has been a huge, huge problem. And a problem of substance it's just not today. If you think about the 12th step, that was about alcohol, the destruction of the family. Come from an alcoholic family, and it's a challenge for how you live and how you see the world. I mean, this issue of substance has been around forever. And some of it comes from this sense that I need to escape my troubles. That's why it means that all of us have to have a partnership from the top to the bottom. You're going to hear more initiatives from us. I want the people of Ohio to know that we're all working aggressively here. This is one of those issues that, thank God, supersedes party or philosophy. The people of Ohio ought to know that we're on top of this as much as we can, but we also want to ask the people of Ohio to aggressively join our partnership from top to down. And if we do that, we're going to have better gains, less death, more success, healthier communities, healthier families, and more young people with a bright future. So, thank you. I want to thank our team that's here. You know, Dr. Hurst, Dr. Applegate in particular. They could leave the state and make a lot of money. They've chosen to serve here. The members of the boards, they jumped on this very quickly. See, we don't have to do anything other than these guidelines are out, the boards will meet, they'll enact it, and that's it. I mean, there's no more fumbling around or any discussion or need to pass any bills. This is done, which is really great news. So we want to really thank the boards, the communities, the associations that are here with us, and everybody who works on this. St. Tracy, it's Tracy Plauk, and her work, Greg Moody and all the work, Barbara Sears, who came over from the legislature. I mean, a lot of people, you gotta understand, this takes a lot of work. And they are dedicated public servants, and maybe even a shout over here to Kim and Kelly and a lot of people involved in all this. We're working as a family and as a team, and that's terrific. So let me see if there are a few questions, and we can go from there.
I'm well aware of the multifaceted approach to this issue, but I keep hearing from people out in the trenches, more treatment, more money for treatment. Have you thought about that? I know you thought about it. Is it going to happen?
Well, you know, we went from, I don't have exactly the numbers, from a couple $100 million to almost $1 billion. And what we find is when we're out in the community that there's a lot of people in the community that don't know what's available to them. And there's also people out there that don't know where to go. So there's going to be a concerted effort to do that. We have been surprised at times how people have not been able to access or didn't know how to access the resources that were available. So it is important. Tracy, I think, will have some phone number information up as to where people can go. You know, actually, we've been surprised at times when we have been out in the community that all the people who would be involved in the community had never seen each other before, had never worked together before. This is where we have to make sure that the community knows what's available and that they all work together. Part of the reason why I expanded Medicaid, and as you all know, fought so aggressively to make sure that we get a health care reform bill, is so that we don't lose the resources that we need to be able to treat the mentally ill and the drug addicted. You see, the expansion of Medicaid has not only just helped those people who are on Medicaid, but it's also provided more flexibility and resources to the local community where they can begin to serve people who don't even qualify because they're making more money, don't qualify for Medicaid. They now can be treated. So, you know, all these things need to continue. And so we'll work with the communities, and when they have shortfalls, they need to let us know. Yes, sir. We're not proposing, this is done. This is not even a question of proposal. This is it. This is done, it will be enacted, and it will be carried out. So there's no proposal here.
But it's on the front end of the prevention. At what point do you think you start to see it show up in the fatalities?
Yeah. Well, I think everybody here we heard it from a number of these professionals here. The gateway to heroin are prescription drugs. So we have had a number of people who got addicted to prescription drugs, and as the prescription drugs have become less available and therefore more costly from those that peddle them, people have gone to heroin on the street, which is cheaper, more accessible, believe it or not. So the issue, so there's two ways to look at it. Number one, we have this group that's moved over here in the danger zone. What we're trying to do now is to not have another generation get hooked on prescription drugs so that they then move themselves into the area of heroin addiction. Then on top of the heroin, of course, we've got these other drugs, the other opiates that have come in, like fentanyl, which is very, very deadly. So part of why John Bourne and the Highway Patrol are out busting all these people, and we got to get the statistics to you, is because we want to drive these criminals out of this state. Now, when it comes to heroin, you know, it's a 2-year process. So I try to explain to people in Washington, you know, you just don't like get off of heroin. If you talk to experts, it's a couple years. You have to have treatment, and you have to have a significant counseling in order to get off this drug. So when do I think it will slow down? Well, when you have a 20% drop in the number of prescriptions written, when you see the interdiction that's happening on the highways, and now when you have the boards agreeing to clamp down even more, we'll see results. But we're paying a price for the fact that we had a lax, it's gone on forever. Listen, when I became governor, how did I get interested in this? I went down to Southern Ohio, and I had a group of women tell me that we had pill mills down there. What the heck were we doing? And I shut them down immediately. But they existed down there for a long period of time. Think about how many people got addicted because we had pill mills down there and doctors operating them who were crooks, who we've taken their licenses, and I think some of them are in jail. I mean, this is something that we're paying a price now for a lot of the neglect of what happened in the past. But that doesn't mean anything other than the fact that we have to throw everything we can at this level. We have to throw everything we can at this level, but also try to make sure that the community at all levels are warning about the dangers of these drugs. I don't ever like the whole thing of medical marijuana. It got passed because somebody was going to have something that was a broader law. What do I think is going to play in this? Introducing another drug? Look, you try to tell kids, don't do drugs, right? Except you can do this drug. Now, I know that that's not recreational marijuana. Okay, recreational use. I know it's limited. I don't see any role in this at all. Any other questions? Yes. Well, when you're again, maybe I'm not being clear. We had a whole generation of people who got hooked on prescription drugs. When the doses come down, that means there are fewer people that are going to get hooked on prescription drugs. And with the action today, it's going to be harder and harder to get them. What happens? We have grandma or grandfather or mom or dad that go, they get these pills, they take a few of them, they put them in their medicine cabinet, and they become available to somebody else. As you clamp down on the prescription drugs, it gives us a better defense against that movement into heroin. I mean, I don't think most people wake up in the morning and say, I'd like to just shoot heroin. It's a process, and it starts, there are gateway drugs here, most particularly the opiates. So as those prescribing doses comes down, they're less available, it's harder to get. People are more and more aware, don't get into that, because if you get into it, you become a drug addict. So in terms of where I think we're going to see the progress as time goes on, particularly with clamping down even more, which is where we are today. Had we done this sooner, I think we would have risked, as the doctors tell me, I have to listen to doctors, they tell me if we'd gone too far too fast, we would have had an access problem. People couldn't get to see the doctors. So it's just a real problem. And the fact that we're an artery here, but when you look around at the areas, whether it's Kentucky, they're sort of in the artery. You got West Virginia. The one that was, very stunning was New Hampshire, probably to some degree related to poverty there. So I think we're definitely on top of this, but nobody looks at those statistics and says, oh my goodness, that's a reason to say, all these great things are happening. It's going to take time. And there is no, I think Jay said it best, there's no silver bullet here. It is a slow and steady wrenching down, and both from the top down and the bottom up. That's kind of the way I see it.
Governor, what happens if the Medicaid expansion does not survive? What happens to this program?
It'll be a problem. We'll lose resources. But I think it will survive. I mean, at least I hope so. In some form, it'll survive. I want it to survive. Look, what I would do with Medicaid expansion is that program can be phased out over a period of time. It can't be phased out after 2 years or whatever. If it got phased out over between a 5 and 10-year period, given the next governor the flexibility to set some other standards in terms of Medicaid, and taking on the pharmaceutical industry, by the way, which is our biggest problem, we can deal with that. We can actually, over time, take the match from the 90-10 and make it a more traditional match. We can do it over time. But to just do it like that, and as I've told people, I've told Senator Portman, I've told my colleagues, my former colleagues in the House, who I just met with this week, I've told them that, what it is like when you have to administer a program like this. And the great news is, for us in Ohio, I'm not looking for money. Our Medicaid grows at 3%. It's a flat rate right now. It went from 9% to 3%. And I'm not running for anything. That's really a great thing. It gives you more credibility when you're not running for another office, So when I talk to these people, I tell them, these people who are addicted are going to need care for a long period of time. It's not that you snap your fingers and they're off heroin. I mean, look, I can tell you many stories because I know people who I'm close to. One, I'm thinking about right now, has a kid who's a heroin addict. He's a big major executive of a company. I mean, and so what's the situation? He has a major heart surgery. He has a valve replaced, which is what happens when you get hooked on heroin. And so I say, how's he going to do? Well, we hope he's going to do well. He finally came back to Ohio, was living on the streets out west. I don't get any more specific. And the question is he still a heroin addict? And this is a great young man, and he got into it not because he was depressed. He just went to school, and one thing led to another, and he's doing OxyContin, and that was the trip to heroin. And so you need to have these resources if you're going to heal our communities. Part of the problem is when you're in Congress, and I used to be there, part of the problem is there's too much theory and not enough practicality. Well, maybe this will work. Well, maybe this will work doesn't work. But I understand the disconnect, the disconnect between being in Congress and being a mayor or a commissioner or a governor. There you have the responsibility to make these things work. Now, no one has fought harder to try to preserve this. Well, many of us have fought hard, but I'm working with everybody else I can to bring light to this. I can't, you think I'm going to predict what Congress is going to do? I was happy today to see that Sherrod Brown and a number of Democrats in the Senate said, we'll work together to fix his health care plan. I've been saying that for a long, long time. And so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that they will get this right, and we'll have to see. But, I've had my voice out there and will continue to be there. Okay? Thank you.